So yeah, thank you everyone for coming along. Obviously, a lot of familiar faces and some new ones as well. Just to say. So yeah, this is based off the last BIboss that we did, which you probably, if anyone was on there, probably recognise Stephen. So I think it was one of these industries, obviously being in healthcare, has probably been hit the hardest. And I think what we realised after a conversation is that what healthcare in general has undergone is a data transformation that might have taken years to implement in such a short space of time. And so everyone was interested to hear more about it. So what we've done is we've put together another panel. So we've got Stephen. I don't know if you want to raise your hand so everyone can sort of see you. Yeah. So Stephen from NAHR, which we'll come back to. And then we've got Cleveland from UKCloud, specialises in health, and also a non-exec director at Leeds and York NHS Foundation Trust. And we've got John Sammut as well. There we are, from health management. So working with data at different levels of healthcare, and thought it'd make for a really interesting comparison, looking at the politics, what's changed, where we are now, what's not worked as well. You know, we're gonna have that really honest conversation. And then what can we actually do, taking all these lessons learned, and how can we emerge stronger and make sure that this has been worthwhile. So I thought we'd start by doing a little bit of an intro for everyone. So a bit of an intro as to sort of who you are, the company that you work for, and then we can start getting into the first point being around what's changed over these last 5 months. So yeah, Stephen, since you were here obviously here on the last one, do you want to kick things off?
Sure. So, hello everybody. My name's Stephen Locke. I'm the Interim Chief Information and Technology Officer for something called the National Institute for Health Research, which in normal times is based in Leeds, but at the moment is based in kitchens and bedrooms. We used to call ourselves the best kept secret in the NHS because people are not all that familiar with what the NIHR does, but essentially we provide infrastructure that's embedded in the health service so that when people want to do research, they have people on the ground ready and able to do that work. And we also fund research, we train people to be researchers, and lots of other activities as well. As I say, we used to call ourselves the best kept secret, but since COVID came along, we seem to make the news and things like that. All of a sudden people are interested in medical research. I have no idea why. So that's me. In normal times, I mentioned that I'm interim. Normally I'm the head of business intelligence there, which is how I've got to know Zach. Me.
Sorry, mute myself. There we are. Yeah, cheers, Stephen. Yeah, John, on to you next.
Yeah, but I'm just going to say I think that's the most used phrase of this year so far. You're on mute. So yeah, I'm Jonathan Sammut. I'm the Business Intelligence Director at Health Management. So we're one of a handful of companies owned by our large corporate parent, which is a company called Maximus. So we specialise in occupational health and wellbeing. So a little bit of a different feel compared to what Stephen and Cleveland may be talking through today. We primarily focus B2B range of public and private sector clients. So yeah, good afternoon to everyone. Looking forward to this.
Perfect. Cheers, John. And then Cleveland, last but by no means least.
Hi, Cleveland Henry here. I'm the BI fraud. I do nothing to do with anything to do with BI. Yeah, as mentioned, so I'm Director of Cloud for a cloud computing company called UKCloud, and I help lead the health division. So I focus on providing cloud computing and capability and associated services to the health, predominantly the NHS. I'm also a non-exec director at a NHS trust, so Leeds and York Community Foundation, or Mental Health and Learning Disability Trust, and I sit on the board to help lead digital. And again, just for more information, I spent 6 years in one of the NHS departments, so NHS Digital, which have clearly been in the press lots, and I led a number of national programs. So you may or may not know about NHS Digital, but similar to Stephen's bunch, big custodians of data around health. So that's me.
I think it's worth bearing in mind as well, obviously you do come into regular contact though with data, obviously, don't you? You know, it's just maybe not the key focus. But I think, yeah, a great place to start is how it's all changed over these last 5 months. I think you can all agree that it's changed massively in all sorts of different ways. So I thought it'd be nice to sort of kick things off. I mean, whoever wants to start, to sort of talk a little bit about that journey, about what's changed and the similarities and differences between each organisation.
I don't mind kicking off. Everything's changed, except the fundamentals of what we're here to do. So I'm sure there's some people on this call that were on the previous one, but forgive me if I repeat myself a little bit, but the business intelligence team in the part of the NHR where I work it's about 11 people, but really about, probably about a third of them aren't really BI people. They're just, it's a location of convenience for their jobs. They're not analysts, I should say. It's not what they do day to day. And like many a team like that in lots of organizations, where data isn't the primary focus of what we do. Primary focus of what we do is deliver cancer studies or stroke studies or something like that. It can be hard for a team like that to carve out a niche. They're seen as nice to have, data that they produce, analysis that they produce is sometimes, hits a spot and is useful and is used. And other times it's utterly ignored, but it still has to be produced on time and schedule and so on. Now, what we observed was the moment that the pandemic struck, our organization had to pivot to become the COVID-19 or urgent public health research body. So we stopped a lot of our normal activities in order to focus on that. That's what the whole organization did, which meant that everybody in our organization, regardless of what they did, suddenly had a new role, and that role might change from one week to the next. We had to create a brand new way of assessing whether research was good rapidly. We did that. And that meant suddenly everybody was hungry for data, and they were hungry for data right from number 10 down to our peers and colleagues in our own organization, because back in the middle of the pandemic, one of the only hopes we had was research. Well, it's still, the only way we're going to get out of this is through research. If we find a vaccine or if we find a way of curing people who get COVID. So you can imagine the urgency with which we had to work, but also the pressure and the visibility. I told the story previously about how I went from offering to do some work on a Wednesday for somebody for my own chief exec, to that being spread to the National Urgent Public Response Panel later that afternoon. The following morning, it was picked up by the Chief Medical Officer's office and elements of the Department of Health. And by sort of 4 o'clock the next day, we were committed to a daily analysis direct to the Chief Medical Officer on exactly where people were being recruited into every single COVID-19 research study in the country. So, I mean, that's quite a major shift from shouting to be heard to being a vital cog, and the visibility and the pressure that comes with that was intense. We went instantly to 7 days a week at a time when we couldn't hire anybody. It's difficult to look around the organization and pull in skills of people like an analyst. If there was an analyst, they'd be in our team. So there's lots of other help we could get, but we couldn't get more hands. So that meant that we had to be really agile. We had to be ruthless about what we did and what we didn't do. We had to move fast. I, as the sort of leader of the team, had to try and maintain some sense of well-being and care for the staff. That was crucial. But then eventually, all of that became business as usual. But I'm sure, like other teams, all that meant was that the normal business as usual was layered on the new business as usual. And then in our case, more stuff came along. So recently, our organization has worked with NHS Digital, and I'm going to do an advert here and I'll put it in the chat in a minute. We, in about 3 weeks from a standing start, developed a system whereby you can volunteer to be contacted if a vaccine study becomes available in your area. So this is a gold badged, safe vaccine trial. And so we're now involved in things like resource planning for the next 12 months. How do you find enough staff to safely vaccinate 10,000 people in a month in Southampton? You know, from a standing start. We're talking to the army. We're talking to retired GPs, where, you know, totally different kind of work. So from a BI point of view, that means new kinds of analysis that we've never done before, and still we can't hire any people. And then we've layered on top of that, we are, now that the peak of the pandemic has passed, we've been asked to restart all the other research that was paused. Huge effort on there, on reporting on what's going on. And then the final piece of the jigsaw is helping to use data to predict outbreaks, and therefore where to place research, where to place vaccines research, and that kind of stuff. And so reflecting all that, looking back now, our team has gone from being nice to have, you know, respected, but slightly peripheral, to absolutely at the heart of everything and every meeting. And that's a challenge. And now well-being and maintaining staff health is my primary focus as the leader. Hope I didn't talk too long.
That's absolutely fine. Yeah, I mean, so how does that compare then to either of your two teams, Cleveland and John?
I think, I mean, what Stephen has just talked about there just strikes a chord with everything that's happened. I mean, look, you know, one thing I always say, right? So the NHS is extremely data rich, but it's information poor. And that's where, you know, business intelligence, as Stephen has said, I think he couldn't have said it better, has moved away from nice to have to an essential part of how health and care is not only delivered, but using the data to predict. And what happened in COVID, right? So, you know, my organization, as I said, cloud provision, we've been doing a lot of work across the NHS. We were part of the 100,000 genome program, where we were collecting data from 100,000 people, no doubt, and then undertaking genome sequencing and doing some predictions on future health care and avoidance of individuals. So the NHS had started, and you know, Stephen's area does it every day in, day out, has really started to get their head around what that data, the patient data, the information that can use to actually start their future planning. What happened, you know, as a board member, I sit in board meetings every month for an NHS trust, and I look at a series of reports that are telling me what happened last month. What happened with the pandemic was an absolute game change, where we need information now that's telling us the situation today and what it actually means. How can we predict, you know, all of a sudden, how can you start understanding the impact of a particular type of patients, where they're going to be? You know, it's very different to everybody being dragged into single physical locations, but actually needing to be intelligent with your information to make business decisions. And it's just changed the whole mix of how we now deliver and will continue to deliver health and care. You know, you individuals that are experts in business intelligence, you will not believe the demand that is about to come for BI expertise to operate in what was traditional healthcare areas, because it's all about the data, and it's all about using the data intelligently to make decisions as the changing landscape continues. And, you know, we see it today. You know, we're seeing outbreaks in regions and outbreaks in countries, and using that data real time in order to say, I can treat this person, I can see that person, I can or I can't, etc. And what is, you look at some of the longer term impacts, what is the impact to cancer patients not being seen today? And you predict, and you use the data to define and look at patterns of behaviours and patterns of outcomes and the rest. So, I mean, the data and the utilisation and the intelligence around the data is now the game changer, and COVID has been the biggest kick in the butt that the healthcare has had to realise and to bring alive the data that was always there and moving it into intelligent information. And we've seen some great examples, again, before waffling on too long. Another thing we were involved with, so we helped one of the regions in London who had the biggest impact of COVID, and therefore the largest number of deaths in an area at the time of the real peak. And we helped them created the infrastructure and enabled them to create a whole modelling solution on data analysis around the sad but very real death rates that they were experiencing. And a lot of that has helped to understand some of the, which I know some of Stephen's data has also fed into it, has really looked in some of the cohorts that have been significantly impacted. There's been significant impacts to people with underlying health conditions, to BAME communities, etc. And all that data that Stephen's team has created has also it continues to be used in live environments, and we've been supporting the North West London region in using that. So massive game changer. It's all changed.
A question for me. Do you feel you've obviously, like you say, you're now being able to influence things and say, look, this is the power of data. Do you feel you've been able to extend that influence to say, this is what we actually need to progress this even further? If you think back at the start, what you mentioned is obviously you're receiving data and looking back historically. So in effect, I guess the people who first came to our forefront on the data in, say, February, were generally those with underlying health conditions, and they would rock up to a hospital, say, I'm struggling to breathe, and then, perhaps a high rate would die. So initially you think your modelling or whatever would say, this is a massive problem. If this is scaled across the country, it could affect 1 million people or whatever it may be. Whereas obviously, if you can proactively say, I need perhaps a random sample of 100,000 people across the country, as it was alluded to finally after 6 months on the BBC Today, this will help me go across all ages, demographics, genders, races, whatever it may be, and get a real accurate flavour on that. Have you been able to push it forward and say, actually, give me this and I will be able to tell you far more? Or is it still in a reactive place at the moment?
I would say it's still in a reactive place for us. However, and I'll put a comment here in the sort of chat thing. One of the things that allowed us to do some really effective work is that barriers that were between organizations have just fallen away. So one of the key things that we were able to do was take data on live, but daily, it's close enough, admissions of people with COVID. Now that data is held by NHS England, which is a separate body. Now, just to get a meeting, to have a chat about whether I might be able to attend another meeting to find out whether I could get permission to access this data would have taken months previously. This time around, the whole thing was agreed in about 24 hours. I was introduced to somebody, they were, in the same space as us. We were all trying to solve the same problem. All the barriers are broken down. I've signed a quick email. We didn't even, have to fill in a form to say why I was what I wanted it for, what I was going to use it for, what I wasn't going to use it for, and we got it like that. And we get it daily now, and that kind of thing has been fantastic. But I was listening to Cleveland there. I think one of the reflections that I had is that now that we're, as sort of BI professionals right in the heart of things, that's great. But there aren't that many of us at the moment. There needs to be more, or we need to partner better with organizations who can do this on, in a better way. There are challenges around access to data in that as well. But, we need to look at these kinds of things. But I was thinking that a problem that I'm increasingly having is that we did so well in that initial response that people think that we're geniuses now. And I'm having to teach people, you know, the phrase garbage in, garbage out, that, you know, I cannot turn that pile of rubbish data into brilliant analysis for you because the input is rubbish. And talking about the effect on certain ethnicities, it's a very real detectable thing and something that as organizations we want to respond to very actively. But the data is poor on just like Cleveland mentioned, you know, BAME communities, just on who gets admitted and what their, you know, background or ethnicity, or that data is poor. So we can try and analyze it, but it's not amazing. So this is the next step, and it's really good observation of yours there, that, you know, we need to get on the front foot, start demanding better sources.
In addition to that, do you think it perhaps, and I don't know if this is something you think would be valuable or not, you mentioned there the fact that there's previously been lots of organisations and different teams doing this with wealth of data, and I think it was summed up really well by Cleveland, saying information is, you know, it's data-rich information poor. Do you think you could use this almost as a spearhead to pioneer a unified approach to data across the NHS? You've got, what is it, 200 and something NHS trusts. You know, I went on a training course many years ago in Westminster, and there were 200 odd data analysts there from the NHS and me at William Hill. And the beauty was, because I looked after William Hill in its entirety across 17,000 people, whereas it was a bit more fragmented. And so therefore, if you could pull that together, where you're saying you've only got 8, 9 staff and they are very absolute snowed under, obviously if you can pool it all together, you get economies of scale. You can say, well, you few people do this, you few, because if you're analysing it for hospital A, it's the same as hospital B. Yeah, it's a simple group by function. So therefore, by pooling that together and saying, look, across the actual NHS organisation, there's 200 people and 209 people, we can really work together to, one, get the economies of scale, have some people sorting the data, some doing BI, and some doing that all valuable insight to say, this, guys, is really what is happening. I'm starting to see a story. And then ultimately, icing on a cake, a few clever blokes smarter than me in DS to say, if you carry on, it's going to go this way, that way, or whatever it may be. And, you know, it's amazing that sometimes it takes a sledgehammer like this to make the absolutely bloody obvious thing work, because people all naturally look after their little islands.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I think it's a bit of both. You see what's happened. Part of the overall government response to this has been to centralise everything and outsource it, and you've seen how that's gone, right?
And that's something else. Whether we put our political hats on or our BI hats, outsourcing just means you end up managing something rather than doing something. But anyway, let's not go down that route. Carry on.
Well, no, I'm kind of agnostic, because in some cases that's absolutely the right thing to do, and the NHS does it all the time. You know, so let's take, for example, doing MRI scans in rural places. Far better to pay a company that will bring up a lorry and do it for you. You know, park it outside of Waitrose or whatever. Don't have Waitrose in rural places, do you? To get there. So in that sense, yeah. But I think what we need is analytical skills to populate the health system. You know, we need it everywhere, and we need boards, and we need leaders that can work and understand data, you know, and not demand a pie chart.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, actually, that Stephen touches on there. I mean, outside of the whole demand on BI teams and, you know, data gaps, which I'm sure we've all absolutely highlighted in the last 3 or 4 months, and I'm sure it's things we've been talking about for years and kind of kicked down the road a bit, but actually there's been a significant culture shift, certainly within my organisation, in terms of the questions that have been asked of data people. You know, we're kind of moving away from how can I make more money into really targeted, specific questions around, I've got a really good channel here, how can I increase revenue there without jeopardising quality over here? And I think there's been that shift. People are starting to ask much better questions now of their data teams, and I guess their understanding has kind of grown alongside the demand. You know, that they're asking a lot. Obviously, you know, there was a time I had a full head of hair before all of this, but actually the quality of what they're asking is now getting better. I think people are starting to know their numbers more. they know their business better, that they understand what good could look like. And I mean, certainly in my experience, it's been a continual battle to try and drive that message across. But I think that, you know, the whole COVID piece has really expedited that quite quickly in the last couple of months.
You know, I'd completely support that. I do think our audiences, our customers, whatever they are seeing that real and starting to ask different questions. But you make a really good point. You know, absolutely. I think this is you know, I called it the kick up the butt. That basically says we need to pool resources. You know, anyone who thinks there's one NHS, it's a brand. You know, there's multiple individual organisations in the NHS, but this pandemic has demonstrated that it actually doesn't discriminate by whether you're in North Yorkshire, Suffolk, or wherever. And this, you know, this is a real, it's almost a ready reckoner. It's the kick. But hey, you know what? What for me about BI and intelligence and using that data is about us as a community, and I'm counting myself in this space now, in being able to express the value of what strong business intelligence does. People talk economics, yeah? And let's have a look at something that's happened during COVID. So during COVID, we have spun up as a country, I think it's 7 Nightingale hospitals. So these field hospitals that were spun up in preparation for an absolute nasty rush of requirements for ventilators and the rest. That plan was clearly based on what we'd seen in other countries, Italy being the key, but actually based on data, or the lack of, and the modelling in order to say what we really need is. And we built these at huge costs. And you know what? If we'd have needed them and they weren't built, everyone would be, you know, saying, why the hell did we build them? But actually, when you're making real significant decisions with correct, valid, not rubbish in, but quality cleansed data, and then use that to make some intelligent decisions, you'd make, you know, in a similar scenario, we would decide whether to spend 10 million on Nightingale hospitals and build them to a certain capacity, or I don't know the exact number, but it's a lot more than 10 million. And, you know, and when you look at, you know, so let's talk economics. That's what intelligence of data allows us, the benefits it brings us to make some decisions that are going to ensure we're spending the public purse in the right places. So, you know, the value of it, using it, pooling it together, I mean, it's a no-brainer, but we in this area have got to be able to articulate that back to individuals who are bloody clever, much more clever than us. You know, we're talking people that perform significant surgery and the rest. They're much more clever than us, but we've got a skill that that can add absolute value and save significant money. So that, you know, for me, that's what it's all about.
It seems like we're talking a lot about, obviously, there's been a lot of change. It seems like we're coming up with some solutions as to already what could be done better. Where are we now then in each of your organisations?
Yeah, I'll pick up. I think, you know, outside of demand, you know, we talked around data gaps a little bit earlier. I think Stephen was talking around how we sort of unlock some of that. For us, we've really fast-tracked the issue around, there's lots that we haven't got. You know, there's questions we can't answer. There's stats that we can't pull together, and actually it's now obvious it's a fundamental flaw in what we do day to day. So what we've had to do is, over the last 3 or 4 months, fast track projects to unlock new data sets, or even our understanding of different data, to be able to answer some of these questions. And actually, you know, these are projects that would have typically taken, you know, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and okay, we've had to probably throw out the window a lot of the formalities and bureaucracy that you might normally go through in these types of data projects, and it's helped us break down barriers. And actually, you know, we talk around how businesses are perceiving data teams now. You know, there's a real reliance and a real need for us, but actually, I think it goes the other way as well. We understand how we fit into supporting organisations better. we understand the why, in terms of why do we do what we do. We're far more than just data people. We understand the business, probably more so than anyone who sits on any board. And actually, we've now got a platform to talk about that and share ideas and share thoughts. And I think something that, you know, certainly in health management we've been doing is actually having those conversations and giving people platform to raise the ideas. And it sounds really simple, but actually it's been quite powerful. You know, it's generated some real change. It's generated a level of visibility that's never existed before in the business.
I agree, Jonathan. And I think from so I'll put my two hats on. I think from my UKCloud hat on, what's changed now is actually talking to organizations about creating data platforms, you know, creating the environments to actually start doing this real and doing it properly based on evidence and experience. Because organizations, and this goes into my next role around my NED role, we start now talking about modeling. You know, we're talking a lot about predictions and using that data to allow us to make decisions. Like Jonathan said, you know, we've always done this, but what was common was actually we always ask for information, but we look at it and someone would go off and spend a month or two and then they'd come back and give us some findings. Now I sit on the board, I want real-time information to make real-time decisions that are going to take place in the coming period, not just looking back and then forward planning. So it's, for me, what's changed is accelerated decision making based on facts. That's the big change, and allowing me to predict and propose forward.
I've seen exactly the same, and something else that kind of just to almost counteract what I said before about the, you know, having rubbish data, is I'm finding myself having to also talk to my own exec team, which is fairly straightforward. But you know, we report to the Department of Health daily, hourly sometimes, and they come back and they say, but this number doesn't match the one that you gave us last week. And we say, no, but that's because the data has changed. You know, we know more than we did last week. It has caught up. And that used to be something that happened on a kind of, with that relationship, like an annual or at least quarterly at most cycle. And it was exactly that. We were reviewing what happened last week, last month, last year, analysing it, saying this is what happened. Everybody glance at that in a meeting for an hour or two, pick some holes in the data and move on. That was it. But now they want that same data set daily. And that's fine, it's great. It accelerates all the decision making and they're all over it, brilliant. But it now exposes them to our world, which is, you know, this is imperfect. You know, this is not, it's as close as we can get to the truth, but I might tell you the truth is different in 5 days' time. And that's been really interesting, you know, to try and and having those kind of discussions with, you know, senior policymakers is putting them in a difficult situation, but I think they're adapting pretty well. You know, I think they're getting it. But then we have this other tension in what we do, which is a fair bit of the stuff that I've described there. You can imagine there's politics with a big P involved in this. And if a minister quotes a number, that is expected to be a fact. And we send this stuff up with a list of caveats like this, and then it gets quoted in a press briefing or something like that. And then we're stuck with it and we have to deal with it forevermore. But, yeah.
So Stephen, on that point, how can we better manage those risks around the decisions being made on imperfect data? And how do you keep a handle? I work in government and currently in NHS England improvement on the policy side, looking at health inequalities as well.
Oh,
and there's a fine balance in that I found over the years, where the data and the analysis you do is set around a context and you're kind of solving one issue. And then if someone lifts and puts it somewhere else, they can be making completely the wrong decisions. So do you guys have any ideas on how to mitigate that, apart from keeping like really good relationships where you can? Like, how do you get past that? That number can go very far, very quickly.
It can. I think what what I found is that, and this can be a little bit of a difficult thing for some people by nature who gravitate towards BI roles, but you need to have the confidence to be in the room to explain your data and explain it in a way that makes sense to non-data people. And that's a different skill, but it's one that is absolutely crucial. Otherwise, these things happen. Now, for my part, I find that relatively easy because I'm not actually an analyst by background. But I work with my team, and there's, you know, let's say about half of them are never going to be that person and don't want to be that person. They don't want to be in the room with the senior decision makers other than to maybe just answer some questions. They don't want to sell what they've done. And that's absolutely fine. You know, that's balanced because they've got amazing skill sets and, you know, rigor and detail and that kind of stuff. But I've found, you know, having to coach people that I work with to give them the confidence to do that. And once they're in the room and they're part of the discussion, it feeds both ways. They start to understand the pressures that the policymaker is under. And that then the number of times you see it happen, I teach them always to ask the question, you know, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And I've heard better versions of that one, but they never lodge in my head. And then you get that discussion about, well, actually, the problem I'm trying to solve is I've got a minister that's going to ask me a question in an hour's time. And then you can, then the analyst can quickly go, wow, well, actually, give them this. Don't give them that. Don't give them that thing that you asked for. Give them this other thing. And that's a safer bet. So that's the main thing. I think we have to get in the room. And if you have an organization like the one that I'm in, so I'm now currently, you know, on an interim basis, I'm on the exec. So I'm in most of those discussions anyway. I get invited to those. And so I can do that live. But if that's not the case, then you need to upskill other people and get them pushing at those doors a bit or inviting themselves in. If you go a little bit further than here's the analysis and go, would you like me to come and present it? Most times people say yes. And does that help? It's a very good question, by the way.
I think, sorry,
I'm going to say quickly, you know what, Stephen, you just highlighted something which is probably a skill, a newfound skill that's going to be required from, how do we describe people as a collective, a business analytics, whatever you want to call them. But there's a new skill around articulating the information. You know, it's not just about chucking a report in front of someone, but actually, as has now happened, as the importance of this information has become really paramount, people will be asked to articulate what they mean. You can never get away from the political scenario. All right, you know, anyone can read a piece of information and present it in the way that they wish. And we see lots of it day in, day out. And, you know, let's not go there, that's another subject. But I think what we've got to, the skill that our individuals need to acquire, I think, as Stephen says, is that ability to articulate the information, to explain the caveats of the imperfect output and outcomes, but actually what's the information behind the information. And that's a really, really a new skill and capability that no longer can sit in the back room just creating some great reports.
Yeah, I think Cleveland and Stephen just building on that really good points around the articulation of data. I mean, you know, we're all text by trade, most of it on this call, and it's a different skill. But I guess the other point just to build on is, I guess the onus is on us to understand the business, right? It's one thing talking through data and information, but you know, we've got to ask ourselves, are we providing the right business context? You know, for example, I didn't understand healthcare 5 years ago. I'm a complete novice to it, and now I can half comfortably talk to you about radiation testing or, you know, submarine medicals and things that we do to support really niche markets. And actually, it's that understanding of your business, your customers, your departments within your organization that will help really build on that story. You know, you're able to then play off data, intelligence, insight versus, okay, so what does that mean for my part of the business? And I think it seems simple, but it's something that's very easy for us to forget sometimes.
Guys, as a question, and when we think about the skills gap, just been talking about in terms of articulating data, and you look at how do you get people to understand it? Is this something that, you know, as the BI community, is it being fed back to, you know, education or training providers that this is something that maybe we need from people? And is there opportunities to try to build in those capabilities? You know, I feel that, you know, when you talk about a data course or a data education, the glamorous items of data science probably come up, and people you tend to get a certain person coming out with those qualifications, and maybe that's not actually what you know, the 100% of what people need. Is that something there's an opportunity that we should be taking up to talk to those institutions?
I think it really is. That's a really good point. And I know I've lost track of it now, but there was some people in the Northwest a few years ago who were trying to clarify what these roles are. And I saw a question that went up in the chat about the difference between a statistician and an analyst. I don't know, it's probably not an easy one. I know what I would have my own definition. And a statistician is probably easier to define than an analyst. It means all sorts of different things in different places. But and there are bodies out there that are seeking to try and have some professional standards around analysis, aren't they? And the name's gone out of my head for the moment. But it's a really interesting one, because when I look at those, you do see often it is about the curation of data, the manipulation of data, the management of data, you know, the analysis and so on. And then as an add-on, can you communicate? And actually what we're finding at the moment is all of those skills are extremely useful, but when you're going at speed and it just has to be good enough, can you wrangle it well enough quickly and explain it to somebody that needs to make a quick decision? And that was what was valuable, you know, most valuable at certain points in time. And I think Cleveland has articulated really well that the world has just fundamentally changed for us now, that people expect us to have data available right now so that they can make decisions, and not just on urgent public health stuff, but other things as well. So I said that need is just going to carry on. How we help the next generation of people coming through, I don't know. It's not really, it's a head scratcher, that one, which means it's a good question.
It's something that I've been working with a local university, and this is Alex Whittles from Purple Frog. A local university has been trying to come up with a master's degree conversion for data science, machine learning. And they were tackling it as a very theoretical, statistical approach. And so we've tried to help them adjust their whole curriculum to make it a lot more business focused, and bring a lot more business interaction with actual hands-on work placements, projects involving local businesses. And actually they specialize in healthcare as well, part of Chester University. And trying to find someone who can actually come in and lead that course and be the senior course leader, who can actually make that happen and bring that business side of it in, has been incredibly difficult to try and recruit. So we've actually formed a group of about 6 to 7 local companies who will work with the university to try and help them engage with other companies to get hands-on projects. So at least when students are going through learning the actual hands-on technical skills, they can do it in the context of wider business. And I think that's a really important factor that is missing in most university placements at the moment.
I love that, Alex. I think that's really, I think it's key that we are priming the next generation to come through business ready as well as technically ready. I don't think we can underestimate the need for individuals to have those appropriate business skills. I love the discussion that's been going on, and Jonathan's point about knowing the business, you know, that understanding of what your business is, regardless whether it's healthcare or otherwise. You know, you need to understand the business in order to be able to, you know, articulate what the data means, what it means, and what's the intelligence around it to aid decision making. So completely agree with that point. And I think, as you said, getting the next generation ready would be great. There's one other point I'm going to add. It came through as a question, and it talked about resources and stuff. And one of the other things I think this has enabled or has created a channel for, and that's you can be anywhere in the country. So, you know, all of a sudden, you know, we talk about this whole remote working thing, but actually we can now have a pooled resource or a bunch of BI experts anywhere and able to deal and provide support and expertise anywhere. You know, no longer do you need to, you know, as a no longer a young lad, but when I finished my studies in business and IT, I moved south because that's where business was. But you don't need to do that anymore, because you can be anywhere in the, you know, as I'm showing, in the comfort of your own home and provide that service. So again, that's a real opportunity, I think, for the community. That restrictions, location restrictions, are also removed.
I think these have all been really, really great points. I just wanted to bring it slightly back into, because this could be a whole other session, as we said, in itself, which is great, and maybe that's something we do. But just to bring things back, we've talked a lot about, obviously, what's changed within the businesses, a lot of positive changes in terms of the companies asking more questions, you know, trying to be a bit more self-serve in a sense, like you said, John. What challenges are we still dealing with? What's not quite work? What teething issues or bigger issues are we still dealing with at the moment based on COVID?
I think.
Go on.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think from my perspective, we were talking very briefly and almost flippantly about missing the commute to work, and you know, just kind of referencing Cleveland's point there. Yes, we can be based anywhere, but actually some of us miss the commute time. I mean, I personally used to have that as my sort of decompression time at the end of the day. I'd kind of, you know, I'd sit there, tunes on, 6-hour drive from Brighton to Sheffield, and kind of ponder the day and what the future might look like. And actually, you know, you've got to think about the wider teams. There will be people in your teams and organisations who will be feeling the same. Yes, we're under pressure, we're under strain, and you know, very much in high demand. But we do need to stop and think about the mental well-being of our own people, as well as our sort of customers and sort of patients as well. People are under stress, and you know, there's things we need to give in terms of platform for people to talk, a platform for people to think. More importantly, you know, one of the things that me and the team have been talking about lately is, you know, do we want to have a walking teleconference? You know, it sounds very, very trivial, but just getting out into the open, bit of fresh air, bit of conversation outside of the sort of normal context of four walls is important. And you know, working in occupational health, we've seen before COVID there was already a mental health issue across the UK. God knows what it will be like after we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm only assuming it will get much worse. There will be people suffering a lot harder, and I guess we have a responsibility to make sure we're there for our teams as well, and we give them that sort of space and time to think.
Jonathan, I couldn't put it better myself. I think you've nailed it there. There are a lot of gotchas and the things we need to look out for. And just to add to your point, you know, we're already starting to use information based on the predicted. So, you know, there was clearly a spike of other things, but we are predicting a significant spike of mental health challenges across the population. And that is really scary, really scary. Probably in a longer term, more frightening than the peak we've had just with COVID. So that's, you know, that's a real thing right now. And there's a thing about this remote working, etc. And Jonathan has just nailed it, I think, for me. I think there is a challenge around boundaries between work and non-work. You know, this great working at home, but actually work and play merges, doesn't it? And that's something we have to really watch out for. Mental and physical well-being is really important. You know, my head clearance is done through exercise. So I will very often go and run at lunchtime or go for a bike ride, you know, to give myself that, because I miss even if it was a walk down the corridor between meetings or a commute across London, that was my time to, you know, grab a Starbucks or whatever. All that's gone. And now I can go from call to call to call, literally day in, day out, and up to whatever time, because I've got saved all that time from commuting, isn't it? So I can stay on a call till 7 o'clock, because I'd usually be in the car. So we've really got to watch out for burnout. Stephen's going to tell you, and you know, when he tells us about his operation going 7 days a week, it's great, but is it sustainable? And that's the things I think we have to look at. And I think the other thing is the demand, the real demand. You know, we talk about, it's great that from a BI community perspective, we're being asked to join the meetings, to add to be into the discussions, but the demands and the expectation can be overwhelming as well. So it's, you know, something I've learned that over the years, you've got to be as good at saying no as saying yes. So watch out.
We both spoke really eloquently on this, and I feel really passionate about speaking up about this over and over again. And I feel like as a person with a position of, you know, I have a voice because I'm more senior than others. What I've chosen to try and do over and over again is in a meeting, just ask people to reflect, to check in. How are we? You know, and to really allow that space to breathe. And I can be a bit of a hippie at times anyway, but it's so important, because I think we need to remember that it happens to all of us. We need to be kind to ourselves first and foremost, and then with the people that we have interactions with, and particularly people that we might have some accountability for, that every single connection that any of us has had has been disrupted completely and fundamentally, and we do not know if they will ever recover, if they will ever go back. So not just in the workplace, but every connection. For me personally, I found myself last week describing myself as introverted. And well, what? Hold on, me? Am I really? But what I was trying to express was that's what I've become. I have become less inclined to contact friends, less inclined to reach out and have a coffee with anybody because of the situation that I find myself in. But so does everybody else as well. I try to describe it by saying to people and calling out what I observe. And one of the things was in the middle of that crisis, which was the same for everybody when we were all thrown out of our offices and we all had to go, whatever you were doing, whether you were, you know, obviously we were very directly involved in the urgent public health response, but it's the same in every business, every organization. That was awful and it was difficult, but it was also exciting and it was new and it was, you know, everybody was being creative and finding new ways of doing stuff. That was actually, there was an energy in that. But that energy can only persist for so long. And we detected it in our organization probably about 2 months ago. And we started to just describe it to each other, say, we're all feeling flat now, aren't we? And saying that, so that we allow our staff and our teams to have some space to think, oh, you know what, it's not just me. I think, you know, and now I'm slowly beginning to think, well, what do I do to make this permanent? Because I can't rely on the same people, the same team forever. We're going to have to make some change, but that's going to have to be done at a pace that is appropriate to people's human responses to things.
Just quickly chime in with something. It was actually off a meeting I had this morning with Skipton Building Society, who were talking with their internal recruitment team. And one thing she mentioned, which I thought was particularly interesting that I'd not considered, is when we have people working from home permanently, obviously there's the mental health, which is a whole conversation on its own. But even, I can see a lot of people here do have their own offices, which is great. But you're obviously all very senior, you're probably used to doing quite a lot. There's obviously a lot of more junior people in the companies that will just be working on a sofa. And how do you go about a risk assessment for that? Because if you're working on your sofa 3 days a week for 11 hours, you're going to develop back issues over time. You're going to actually develop physical health issues, not by not exercising, but being in an office, as it were, that isn't fit for purpose. So how do we, with everything that we've taken so far with these extra challenges, how do we actually make sure that what we're implementing, because we've got people banging the drum for years about working from home more, but how do we make sure that that in itself, to your point, is about how do we make that sustainable?
Yeah, I think there's probably two bits for me on that. I think there's a level of understanding, and it's not just, you know, physically where you sit in an office. You know, I'm sat here very delicately placed underneath Bramall Lane, sat behind me, which is great, but actually, if I go downstairs, I've got a crazy barking dog, and you've got other distractions as well, right? We've got family, we've got children, and I think we, as a group of leaders in this industry, we need to have a level of understanding that life is still going on for people at home. So I think we need to appreciate that. I think the second thing is trying to come up with creative solutions. So, you know, you can't stitch on another room in your house always. You can't comfortably move or create that space, but are there alternatives? You know, can you create standing space within a different room? Can you get yourself out to family and friends, obviously maintaining the social distancing bubble? Can you get out and walk? You know, jump on phone calls, group all your meetings together, and try and think creatively outside of, I'm sat at a desk 24/7, it feels, and I've got to stop here. You know, work can carry on, and I think it's a different mindset, and I think it's quite hard for us to change. We've been so programmed into offices and meeting rooms and sort of standing by water coolers having conversations. We now just need to change that, and I think it's trial and error. Certainly from my perspective, it feels you just got to try things and have that understanding.
I agree, and I think it's quite interesting is that, you know, and you're right, absolutely, not everyone has the privilege of a spare room in their house that they can call an office with the facilities and all the rest of it. We have to be really aware of that. I did a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and it was actually led by a building company in Leeds. It was talking about Leeds as a city and how the potential changes on the back of COVID and the working from home. I actually think what we're going to see, well, not think, because I've seen it already starting, we're going to see hubs created. We're going to see offices either in local regions and or city centres where companies will almost hire or rent a booth, so a small enough place where you can sit in, but what it's going to have is a coffee shop and a communal sort of area and the rest of it. Because even me, hey, you know, I'm very, very, I'd like to say fortunate. I've got a nice little study. It's got all my stuff in it. It's got, you know, speakers in the background to listen to cool tunes when I want to just relax and all those sort of gubbins. But trust me, I could do with some people time. I really, you know, want to be able to chew the fat, to talk about last night's European football. And I'm not going to ask someone to get on a Zoom to talk about that. Do you know what I mean? And that is human behavior. It allows me to be a bit more better at what I do by being able to actually talk about things that I'm not doing. So I think we're going to see a changing environment. The world of work is going to change. And I don't think it's the end of offices. I just think offices are going to change. And we'll see lots of companies in the WeWorks, the TOGs of this world, coming together in a new manner. That's my view anyway.
So what are we all doing as businesses here to take everything that we're still learning now and have learned, to make sure, we've used this phrase in previous events, to emerge stronger, to make sure that this hasn't been in vain and that we are taking what we've learned and looking at some of the teething issues that we're still facing and making sure that it is sustainable?
I think the biggest thing for me, I will be quick on this, we've got to be careful not to bounce back to exactly as it was. So we as leaders on this have got to take the responsibility to make sure we come back better and we do it differently and we actually start planning differently, because you know what, otherwise when this dies down, hopefully quicker than anything else, we shouldn't just go back to how it was.
So what are you doing, Cleveland, specifically? Have you got anything either in place or in the pipeline of things?
Well, for us, we're talking about exactly that flexibility of work. We're actually creating the ability to be more flexible, and that is going to allow us to attract a different community of individuals. You know, people who have potentially struggled to work for us or have not chosen to work for us because of our locations, because of our hours of work, but also, and we already, and we've been doing this for a while, we have places in TOG offices, both in Leeds and other areas, so people can go to these touchdown offices that, you know, don't want to work from home. But we don't need, you know, I work for a cloud company. If you can't work anywhere for a cloud company, then you're buggered, really, aren't you? So we've already started doing that, but now we're making it much more as part of our psyche as an organization, and making that really clear while we're recruiting or attracting people to the organization.
Some 2 cents on this. Sorry, I came a bit late. Akatsu here, NHS Digital. I've been listening with rapt attention. There's been a lot of interesting information, lots of different thoughts and ideas. But something that's been occurring to me, and I've been thinking about, that could potentially be very interesting in the next couple of months and years, if you start thinking about it across those timelines, is this issue about stakeholder management. So it's been mentioned earlier about how we ensure that we don't end up with BI specialists who are just technical specialists and have no idea about how to interact with stakeholders and how to solve real life problems or how to communicate their solutions in an easily understandable, relatable way. The current system, and lately I've been recruiting quite a bit, and I've had to do a lot of remote work based on the current situation of things. And I've started thinking there's a chance that we could end up, as Stephen said already, becoming an introvert. We could end up having teams that become introverts and don't have that networking system in place where you go and have physical interactions, you have workshops, you have these sessions to get the feeling of the room, rather than just cameras on and cameras off sort of thing. We're missing, there's a chance we could end up building or breeding a whole new generation of BI specialists who don't have that human interactability, that stakeholder management on that level. I'm a bit concerned about that, because I think if this continues as it is for the next 2 or 3 years, and we don't move to a position where we're trying to, I guess, get back to a human interaction, we could lose this, or lose a set of people, or maybe not lose. We could end up having a different set of skills or different orientation. So it's probably something we might need to think about.
That's a really good point. And I also want to come back on the thing that Cleveland just said as well, but what you can do an awful lot by thinking about how you meet, and you can do that online as well. Now, it's not the same as getting in a room with some post-it notes and so on, but you get in a room with some post-it notes and all the extroverts speak anyway, unless you choose different ways of bringing the room in. I'm a big fan of a thing called Liberating Structures, which is a website, and you get all these interesting techniques for making sure that everybody has a voice, or that you surface the best ideas and things like that. And you can do that stuff online. It takes a bit more thought and a bit more effort, but it does anyway. I still think what you're talking about is a very real problem and something we need to keep an eye on. But I want to come back to the question that Zach asked and then Cleveland's answer. My organization is very similar. We're doing, we're looking at what do people want, and most people want much more home working. It's like 80% of people essentially want to be based at home. So we're going to have to respond to that somehow, but also think about, we do actually have these offices. What are they for now? So we're doing a lot of this thinking, but the point that I wanted to make is actually that I am cautious that now is the time to be too ambitious, and we're still in the middle of this. It's still ongoing, and we don't know how long it's going to persist for. It might be, well, I tell you, give you the best scenario that the people I work with, the best possibility is that we might have a vaccine that starts to work in the middle of next year. Okay. Now, there's loads of great minds all over the world being thrown at this, and I'm reasonably confident we will get it, but that's the best. So if you think, you need to factor that into your thinking. We're not having normal relationships. We're not going back to the office in a normal way. We're not meeting in coffee shops for at least another year. Now, that sounds awful, sounds dreadful, but I think it's better to be honest. I like to add another year to that in my mental map and go, no, hold on, this is me for the next couple of years. So what does that mean? How do I behave? What do I have to do? How do I make sure I take a holiday? When do I get my running in? That kind of stuff. But I'm really cautious that, and there's a real tendency, particularly in tech things, to constantly be saying, we've got to be the best and go for that moonshot and blah, 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 blah. I don't know that now is the time. And it's time to, be the river, go with the flow to a certain extent. Obviously we have to react to the work that's in front of us and so on, but actually surviving is not a bad thing at the moment.
Do you think it also depends on the culture of your team and your workplace as to how much working from home versus office space you can do? Likewise, in my team's 42 at the moment, and there's two divides in effect. The BI developers who build the reports and look after the tech and the data, they're quite happy to sit at home and work from home, whereby the analysts who are really integrated into the business want to know about the marketing campaigns around the operations and really understand it and want to get back to the office. Because what they learn isn't just from a Zoom call on a project brief, it's just overhearing something at the coffee machine or someone on the telephone across. What do you mean you've just said, hang on, no, I'll get you the information around that. And so it's quite a marked camp, so it just depends on your role and where you are. Some people are more comfortable working from home. Some stakeholders say, no, I really want my BI person by me, talking me through it. I don't really understand data. So it's up to you to know your stakeholder, your personality, before we can say, should we be heading into the office or keeping back working from home forever? It's at the minute, like you said, we're having to go with the flow and really work it out. But I guess ultimately it will mean, like we say, less people in the office in the future, more working from home. And ultimately, going on to Zach's point, is as big organisations save money on rent, one thing that can be looked at is, do we take some of that money and give it people in buying desk, better chair, etc., etc.
Sorry, Cleo,
I'm just going to be really quick and say absolutely. And you know, I've seen some very large banking organisations in this country have actually been kitting out their staff for this. You know, Stephen's the bearer of bad news, but it's the reality. I've said the same. We ain't going away for a year, and I think we're going to need to. You know, you just mentioned about culture. I think we're going to have to recreate new cultures, new ways of working, new ways of communicating. You know, we have a couple of times a week a social call. We don't talk any work in our team, and we physically ask everyone to put the cameras on. And I often walk down to a deli near me, which is about an hour away, and I physically walk while I'm talking, and we talk about crap. But you know, recreating a new culture, new way of working, because you know what, we ain't going back to, you know, we ain't going to lock back straight into these offices for. Stephen says, hopefully, best case scenario, middle of the year. I'm writing off another year or a year. That year being very different to what we've previously experienced, and there's a bit of realism of throwing that out there as well to all our people, and how we change to work within it.
Sorry, Zach. Yeah. I was about to say, do you also feel there's a difference? Because I appreciate I'm an old man. I'm, 46. Do you feel there's a generational gap when we're talking between, some of the guys in my team who are half my age now? Unfortunately, they're fine with it. Perhaps they've been used to a digital way of communicating through Facebook, through live Xbox or whatever, whereas me and you would have met in a pub 25, 30 years ago and talked over a beer. So it's also quite interesting just to consider that as well, just because, hasn't it? So it's really interesting how, what's hot for one person is not for another. It's interesting times. Personalization as everything else.
And I think just to build on that, if we're going through it, everyone else in your organisation is going through it as well, right? And we're here to support. We're going back to the point I made earlier around understanding why we do what we do. We're here to help, I think, on the most of it. So how can we help other parts of our organisation also, develop new cultures, ways of working, and let's work together on it, I guess. I think that'll help us shape something better together. I know that sounds like a cheesy politician's line, but I think it's very true.
Sorry, just to backtrack, one of my exact points that Cleveland, you ended up answering was, if we're moving to a point where people, because there's been a big demand for people wanting, there was a poll where it was like people wanted about 80% working from home, which is 4 out of 5 days. When culture is such a big factor for when people decide what company they're going to, how do you go about ensuring that the culture which you've spent so long building up and developing, that it actually maintains? How do people get a feel for that when they're kind of alienated from the group, especially now? It'd definitely be a worrying factor for me if I was to join somewhere, would be, how do you get a feel for the company if you're not there?
That is really, really tough. Sorry to take over again. we've had a couple of new joiners, and where's the rest of the team? They're laughing and joking and taking the mick out of each other on that coffee morning that we have every Friday just to talk rubbish. You do feel at the interview they were really alive and talking, and now they're a bit quiet because they don't know, can they push that person's button? How will they react? And it is very, very difficult, and something I don't think, maybe someone else has an answer out there. I'm in the process of learning it, if I'm brutally honest, because it has been really tough for a couple of new individuals in our team.
If someone's got the answer, can they tell me? It's bloody
we need it on a postcard. The only thing we've done is make sure we put more one-to-ones in with these new people, because we realise it's just really hard. That 90% of communication is through body language and feeling. It's just not there. It is really tough.
It's really hard.
No easy way about it. Like you say, we're going to have to create new cultures. It will become the norm. We're just going to have to break a few eggs to get there.
Well, I think on that note, I think that quite nicely wraps it up. I think it's shown that we've learned a hell of a lot. You know, there's still some challenges that we're trying to figure out, and I think there's still a long way to go to make sure that this is sustainable. But the fact that we can have these conversations openly and talk about challenges, and I think doing these internally and externally on a semi-regular basis, I think is really, really fundamental. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for everyone coming along. You know, we'll obviously do more of these, and we're always looking for speakers and panelists. So if anyone is interested, please let me know. But yeah, I just wanted to say a big thank you for everyone involved.